What's up, everyone? My name is Tyler. You are watching Mom's Basement MMA. My next guest is a retired professional mixed martial artist, and today he is a coach at one of the top MMA gyms in the country, War Training Center. Coach Adam Copley joins me right now. Coach, welcome to the program. Glad we could reconnect. It's been a couple years since we've done one of these.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Tyler. Good to see you again, man.
Likewise, I want to hit on your growth as a coach because you have been coaching for many years. Can you talk to me a little bit? Are there certain philosophies, techniques, or methods that you've used from your fighting days into your coaching career?
Um, the work ethic from my fighting days, like I was always a workhorse and put in a lot of work, but technically, systematic wise, no. I mean, I was a shitty fighter, man. I had minimal technique. I had parts of my game that were good, but I was not well rounded. I did not have a complete game. I didn't have a strategy of I'm going to do this, this, and this in this situation. I had it in certain areas, but that was it. So no, honestly, I feel like I didn't start growing as a coach until 5.5 years ago when I started coaching full time, and now I feel like every single year is exponential growth. And even as a coach, I coached since 2011, but I don't feel like I was a good coach then. I had some guys that won some amateur titles and then had some okay pro careers, and but I never really grew as a coach and got to the skill level I wanted and knowledge I wanted until I did it full time.
And Coach, can you talk to me a little bit? Like, what has been the biggest change in MMA from your fighting days a decade ago to today?
Um, the skills. You have kids who have grown up doing MMA now and getting into the sport. It's been around long enough that just like in football and baseball and basketball and these other big professional sports, you had people growing up from the time of 4 years old doing it, and now you have that in MMA. So the skill has just grown immensely. Back in the day, there was guys who were really good in one area. You had a world-class fighter. He was really good in two areas. And now everyone's good in all areas, like you're not just a boxer and wrestler or a jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai guy. You have to have it all nowadays.
You and Coach Jeremy have been doing something very special. You've built up War Training Center over the past few years, and you guys have like a pretty like solid growing reputation. And can you tell me a little bit like what have been the most challenging aspects of building up the gym over the past couple years?
Uh, and that's a tough question. Really good. Um, I think it's this realizing where to put our focus in there. Like the gym has grown a lot, and we've had some fighters do really, really well. We've had some that I thought would do well and fall off. I think it's just putting the effort into the individuals that are in front of us, and not almost I guess we were almost micromanaging the fighters at first, and now we have a team so big we can't micromanage anymore. And so because of that, like there's certain fighters on the team that don't have that effort and desire on their own, and they're not going to grow and have the same success that they did when there was a team of 10 as opposed to a team of 40. So now as a coach, it's almost like I put my focus into the ones who are there all the time and put the effort in, and the rest of them, it's up to them, and they have to be accountable to themselves because if they're not accountable to us, we don't have the time to manage them, nor are we going to take hours out of our day every single time to manage an amateur who's had one fight, as opposed to when we have focus a guy who's got a UFC or PFL fight coming up with a much more on the line for their career. We're going to put our focus into them, and they're putting in the effort. So yeah, that's been the biggest adjustment. We had a really small team, it was really tight knit. We have a large team now, and it's still like a big family, but if there's individuals who aren't meeting the standards, we have the standards, everyone knows them and the expectations, but if they're not meeting them, and basically what happens is we just don't book them fights, or if they get fights and then they fall off mid camp, then it's on them.
You have a growing amount of fighters in the gym, and you've already kind of like hit on some of those names, but like some that come to my mind, Rainn Guerrero, Josh Walker, Michael Murphy, Trevin Giles, Reese. Like I know there are a bunch more, but you have all these fighters that are at different stages of MMA competition. How do you tailor your coaching approach to meet the needs of your fighters?
All right, so basically what I do is whoever's up in camp, I have a schedule and a list, and they get priority. So I'll put it more individual time in a couple of days a week. I'll put in individual time with those that are in camp and pour into them. I'll do game plans. We'll base practices around them, or small group trainings where I'll bring in just a couple individuals to work with them on specific things. And that's who gets a priority, is whoever's fighting next. And then if everyone's fighting next, I guess the next priority step, say we have 10 people in camp, it's whoever's soonest. And say we have no one in camp in the room, then it's whoever's got the biggest point in their career, and whoever's fighting the toughest guys, they get priority because they need the most help. You know, if I
One
have an amateur with one fighter, I have Zach Reese, who's got a UFC fight on his next bout. I'm going to give the attention to him, obviously.
one of the crazy stories I have about you, like this has probably happened like 2 or 3 different times. I have seen you corner a PFL event on like a Friday night. I've seen you in the Apex on a Saturday, and then I've seen you at Fury on a Sunday. Like I have literally like my entire like weekend block of watching fights. I've seen you in every single one of the shows that I've watched, and like we're not talking about stuff just happening locally in Houston. I'm talking about like all over the country. And
Yeah.
can you like tell me about that? Like how often has that happened, and like how are you juggling the demands? Like how are you able to do all of this? Because not every coach out there would do that. They would send like a delegate or somebody else from the gym to corner, but you don't do that.
No, I try to corner every fight possible if I can. I believe there's something to having a vision of someone with experience in the corner. Granted, we have a lot of other good coaches on team, but Jeremy and myself just make the sacrifice. I mean, if it can be done, then we should get it done because we can't ask our fighters to outwork everyone and then not do the same on our end. And so that's kind of the approach we take. And yeah, we have a lot of times where we get done at PFL at 11 and we fly out the next morning, and then we get done there and fly out the next morning and then get off the plane and go straight to the venue down the street from the airport here in Houston to corner a Fury fight. You know, that's happens at least 10 times a year, it seems like, where we do 3 fights in 3 different states in one weekend, or at least 3 different cities. I got 2 coming up all the time. 2 happens probably 20 weeks a year, but it's just part of it, man. I think it's important if the fighters put in the effort throughout camp and put in the work they need to be, I want to be there for them and match their efforts. You know, I know they sacrifice a lot. A lot of these fighters on the regional scene, like, you know, they're making no money. They're basically breaking even, if that, every time they get paid. And they're putting in all the efforts they can to get to the next level. It's up to me to try to match that energy. And I think if they put in that effort and us as coaches put in that effort, then it'll happen.
I wanted to ask you about a fight that happened a little while ago. Because it's in the history books, I'm sure you can maybe speak a little bit more freely of it. Zach Reese went up against Julian Marquez, and this to me was a very pivotal matchup. Obviously, Reese went out there, he fought Cody Brundage. That one didn't work out for him, and then going into that fight against Marquez, like he was an underdog, and I was thinking to myself, like, man, like no man's land in the UFC is going 0-2. You don't want to do that because then all of a sudden you start being considered like a busted prospect, and then that third fight, they're going to give you the shittiest fight they have. Can you tell me a little bit, like, what was that buildup going into that Marquez fight? And were you, as a coach, and Reese, were you guys feeling a lot of pressure going into that one?
You're absolutely right. You don't want to go into. You could get cut, especially being a younger fighter coming off contenders. That's a possibility. But in all honesty, I wasn't nervous. I don't know how nervous Zach was. Zach's normally cool as a cucumber. I know he gets a little nerves here and there. I think he had less nerves for Marquez than he did for his last fight, honestly. And it just depends on what your body feels like that day when you wake up. Do you feel fresh? Do you feel strong? And he was a little sick this time going into the fight, so I think that's why he had a little less confidence this one. Even though I would say Marquez was a much tougher opponent. Now, granted, Medina was a tough guy to put away. We knew that was a possibility, and he threw everything at the kitchen sink at him, and he lasted longer than Marquez. But I have a complete confidence in Zach's skills. There's a certain caliber of fighter that I think it'll take in order to truly beat him. I think Brundage was kind of a fluke. I know I heard from some interviewers afterwards that they talked to Brundage in the back after the fight, a documentary crew for the UFC, and they asked him about it. And he said he was about to go out, and he remembers he saw it the fight before, and Zach didn't grab the leg. Normally he does, and he had that opportunity. But I think if he fights Cody Brundage 100 times, Cody Brundage gets 1, maybe 2, like I think he's capable. Anyone's capable of beating anyone on any given night, but the likelihood of that happening repeatedly is slim. I think he almost had it in the bag. If he doesn't go to sleep on that slam, he wins. He gets the triangle. Cody Brundage passes out, and he's a hero. And I truly believe in Zach's skills, and I think he'll be in the rankings by the end of next year. And I think he's a possibility to be one of my first champs in the UFC. So
When I think of Zach Reese, like everyone goes right to that knockout, the knockouts, the finishing power. But when I think of him, I think of grappling and I think of jujitsu. I think of submissions. Can you talk a little bit? Like, is that an element of his game that maybe doesn't get enough credit in your mind?
Absolutely, man. He's very well rounded. And I'll tell you this: we did like a King of the Hill and wrestling at the gym, and we had a lot of college wrestlers in there, and he won. You know, it was MMA wrestling, so we needed 3 seconds of ground control, and so that was an aspect too. So scrambles were allowed, and we did it in the cage, so that was another aspect. But yeah, I mean, he's a great wrestler. His wrestling is just not folk style wrestling; it's an MMA style of wrestling, and he has phenomenal jiu-jitsu. He's a brown belt. I would say this: he's better than the majority of the black belts out there. If he rolled with the middleweight division, I think he taps out 95% of the middleweight division. There's very few individuals I don't think he would submit if they rolled for a 5 minute round. He's got phenomenal jiu-jitsu. He's just a well-rounded fighter, and I think that's the thing is there's still at the middleweight division certain guys at the top in the rankings even that aren't well-rounded fighters. Like they're really good grapplers, they're a really good striker, but they're not as well-rounded. And I think that's why he can go far because he can game plan certain guys because he is so well-rounded.
I want to bring it a little bit closer to home. I'm going to ask you a provocative question because I feel like there are a lot of people behind the scenes that don't really understand all the things that coaches have to deal with aside from the fighters. Like, I want to talk more about the business side because oftentimes you guys are like that main liaison between the fighter and the promoter or management. And that's always kind of like an interesting dynamic. As a coach, what do you think is the role of like a sound manager and how do you like put together a constructive working environment with a fighter's management team?
Uh, I think a role of a manager is to manage your fighter. I know regionally that doesn't always happen, and coaches end up handling that anyways, and at a lot of aspects. But yeah, coaches have to take on a little bit of every role. I mean, there's guys who have managers for multiple different companies. They're in my opinion, if you're not with one of the 5 major management companies, you shouldn't be managed at all by them. You should just let your coaches manage you. Like there's KO Reps, Iridium, Dominion, First Round, Sucker Punch. The major ones. But if you're not with one of the major ones and you talk to that management company, your goal is to be in the UFC, and you ask them how many UFC fighters they have, and it's less than 2 or 0, then you probably shouldn't get managed by them. Because if they don't have Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard on their phone and can show you on their contact list, hey, I have their phone number, what are the odds of them getting you in there? It's pretty slim. So there's benefits and negatives to management, and there's benefits and negatives to each one. Like I'll say this: if you go to Iridium, you're probably going to get signed much sooner than you would at other companies. If you go to KO Reps, you're probably going to get a lot more in sponsorship money than you would with a lot of these other companies, at least early on regionally. It just depends what works for you. Uh, and my role with them is just to support. Granted, I try to pass a lot to the managers. Our team has grown to a point now where we can't manage all our guys regionally, and it takes a lot of time and effort and a lot of back and forth, a ton of back and forth that fighters don't realize. So we try to constantly push the promoters and the fighters to let their managers manage them. The problem is I don't know if there's a lack of communication there, but constantly promoters come back to us even after they tried and they're not getting the answers they want quickly enough, or maybe they don't want to have the manager check with us on the fights and all that, and they just want to skip the process. But then it takes up more of our time, and our time should be spent coaching primarily. There's only a few guys that Jeremy and I manage, and on those guys, we don't mind doing it. We put in the effort for sponsors, we put in the effort for booking them and getting them fights and running their camps and stuff. But for everyone else, it's just solely coaching is what we should be doing with them, and that's where our time should be allotted to.
The last time you were on this program, you told me, you're like, Tyler, listen, like, we're about to achieve a lot of great things in this gym. You can expect a lot of my fighters to move up. And you've done that in a relatively short amount of time. You and Jeremy have multiple guys going up to contender, PFL, Bellator, and doing very, very well. Where do you see your gym headed in like the next 4 or 5 years?
I think you're just going to see the continuous growth. I mean, 5.5 years ago is when I started coaching there. 2017 is when Jeremy opened the gym, and I worked with him a little bit then. Jeremy originally owned 4 Ounce Fight Club, actually. He was the sole owner, original owner of that gym, then brought in partners and sold off his and opened up this. And so I just followed him over to War. And just like we saw the growth there, I think we're going to see it here, but we're more systematic. There was too many heads at other gyms and locations, and me and him have a very good dynamic. He makes them tough. He makes them have great cardio. He pushes a lot of the lives and a lot of the situationals and lets them work through it and then gives feedback. I'm more the guy who like puts them through the drills and gives them the options of what to do when it's live. That way they don't have to think about it. And we just have a really good dynamic, just like we did when we both coached at 4 ounce. The guys we worked with together had a lot of success. And I feel like we've carried that over here and kind of made a system. And we literally have a system now. Like, we've systemized everything. We put pen to pad and treat it like a business. I think we're doing something that a lot of other people aren't doing. We're playing stats, and we're going for only the moves that are statistically most likely to work. We're going over, we've really studied the game and put a lot of the stats into the game, which is what I think you'll start seeing a lot more coaches do over the next couple of decades as the sport has grown. It'll get more like football and more like the other baseball, where the stats play a factor into your decision making. But we're trying to implement that where we're currently training these guys, and it seems to be paying off. We've had good win rates every year. I think since we've been together at War, we've had over an 80% win rate total, which is, I don't know if people realize that 80% win rate's hard to do, especially as our competition has grown. We're fighting in some of the toughest regional promotions like Fury FC and CFFC. Then we have guys at the PFL, Bellator, and UFC level, and it's not easy to do to continue winning at that rate there.
Can you, I want to ask you a question, like a casting call type of question. What type of fighters are you interested in bringing on to War Training Center? And if I'm like an amateur fighter looking to like be one of your guys, what do I need to do to get set up?
I want effort. I want guys who are going to be disciplined, whether their life is in order or not. They're going to be in the gym consistently. And that's really what I need. Like, it doesn't matter how talented you are, if you're not going to train the needed time to match these guys at the top level, it won't matter. I think there's a lot of people on the team that have enough athletic talent and enough background and enough good coaching around them that they can get to the UFC. But to succeed at the UFC and have life-changing money, you need to get to your later contracts in there and re-sign with them multiple times. And in order to win at that level, it's going to require a lot of effort. And that's what I want to see. I want to see, as an amateur, like, they have the lifestyle. They have the champion lifestyle. Like, they're in 5 days a week, 5 to 6 hours a day. They do their strength conditioning. They do their cardio. They do their recovery. They put in their extra one-on-one time. They're early before practice putting in work. They're there after practice putting in extra sessions and work. And those are the ones that are going to make it. And when it comes down to it, the most successful guys on the team currently that we have are the ones that put in the most effort.
Well, let's go into the mailbag before I let you go. I put out a post on Instagram announcing that you were going to be on this program, and I had some DMs come my way from fighters all over the world, and I picked the top 4 questions I'm going to ask you. And we'll start with the very first one. I've scrubbed off all the names, so I'm not going to attribute these questions to anybody to protect the innocent. So, first question, how many fights should I have as an amateur before I go pro?
We have a 2 title rule. I think that's a good rule. That means you've won at least 2 very quality fights. 2 guys with winning records, Copley, and a good promotion for the title. And 2 title rules. So you can win it and defend it. You can win at 2 weight classes, or you can win 2 different promotions. But that's our rule for going pro. At least one of our rules is the 2 title rule. And typically that takes around 6 fights for our guys. Like, 4 fights in, they're getting a title, then they defend. So if you're winning all your fights, about 6 fights.
Okay, this question is from a fighter from overseas. They are not American. They are from Europe. I am an amateur fighter and I have a judo background. How can American style wrestling complement my judo skills?
I think they go hand in hand. There's a reason that they don't allow you to grab legs and shoot double legs in judo anymore, and it's because it works, right? A lot of wrestlers have success in judo. I think learn the wrestling and utilize the judo. I also have a little bit of a judo background, and while I don't use a ton of judo, I at least know how to counter judo when it's being thrown at me. But at the same time, you do got to spend the time learning the wrestling. You can't be a one-dimensional fighter. It's important to do both. But I mean, it's a great base. Judo is a great base for takedowns and takedown defense, and also obviously you probably have a submission game already. So yes, go with that. Utilize your base. Use it to your strengths. There's probably techniques and moves that a lot of fighters aren't used to seeing that you can pull off. But don't be one-dimensional. Grow it. Add the wrestling to your game.
This question is from a media member. Women's mixed martial arts is in a weird phase right now. Do young female fighters need to be mindful about getting pushed onto a big stage too early?
If you're 3-0 and the UFC calls, you take it. In my opinion, it's not about getting pushed early. It means when you go pro, make sure that you're ready to fight in the UFC, because the journey is very fast for women. That's correct. So I wouldn't say don't take the opportunity. You always take the opportunity. You're not doing yourself justice if you don't, right? That's your dream. They call, you take it every time. But make sure that by the time that you turn pro, because that path is so quick, that you're already better than a lot of the women in the UFC. in my opinion, that's why I tell my guys, by the time you make your amateur debut, you should be able to hang in there with the guys who are already title holders at your weight class. By the time you go pro, you should already be able to beat some of the people in the UFC. By the time you get signed in the UFC, you should be good enough to fight people and winning the guys that are already in the rankings. And if you're always ahead on that curve and take your time to go to the next step, you'll be all right.
Okay, final question. I am an amateur fighter from a small town, and I'm only a few fights into my career, and I'm scared about already being the best guy in my gym already. How should I handle that without burning bridges? That's a good question.
Cross train, or talk to, go to other camps. You don't have to burn bridge with your current coach. You can keep your current coach involved. There's a lot of guys that come from other cities to us that are also like Reese, for example, lives in Shiner. He travels to us. But the coach he used to work with is still in his corner, and he's a phenomenal coach, to be honest. He's a great coach. He coaches out in San Antonio, and Zach goes out there and spends time with him in camp still. So, yeah, keep your old coach involved. Don't take him out of the picture, you get three corners, so there's an opportunity to keep him in the process and communicate and maybe involve him in your camp still. But if you're the best in your room, you do need to travel and you do need to get those looks, because there's something to be said like about losing rounds. If you have guys that can beat you and win rounds on you, it'll expose holes in your game that you don't want to get exposed in a fight. So you have to have that push. You have to have guys that win rounds on you. You have to have guys that you're even with. You have to have guys that you can beat in the room. And all three are important because all three develop a different part of your game.
Thank you guys for submitting your questions. We're not going to get to all of these today. We'll try to get to more next time I have Coach Copley on the program. Coach, I want to actually give you the mic. If there's anyone that you would like to shout out, thank, anything you need to talk about before I let you go, let's do it.
Just a message to everyone out there. If you want to get to the next level and succeed, you have to have that effort now, guys. I know I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I have a few fighters regionally, like for example, Bruce Whitehead. I want to throw his name out there. And Anthony Ivy was like this before he got back into the big show, but I don't think there's anyone in Houston, especially not at 155, who actually puts in more effort than this guy. And I could be wrong. Prove me wrong, but I really don't. And there's a reason why certain guys are going to have success, and it is that effort. Like if you want this, then you have to want it more than going out and partying. You have to want it more than the shitty diet you're on. You have to want it more than than having to go celebrate your birthday so I don't train that day. Like, those guys don't have excuses. If you want to be the best in the world, you have to treat it like that every single day. And granted, one practice missed won't change your career path, but the decision making behind missing that one practice will, because that's a trend. So set a trend to always be the hardest working person in your gym. We have an amateur female right now, Alex Lawal. In the last year, she's changed her work ethic to a phenomenal amount. She puts in like 6 hours a day, like 6 days a week. It's insane how much effort she puts in. And because of that, she's going to have a lot of success going forward in her career. Like if you want to be everything you say, because everyone says they want to be the greatest ever, they want to be a UFC champion. But I'd say there's a very small percentage, even within my own gym, that are putting that effort in. Like Anthony Ivy, he's on a 7-fight win streak, including 2 in PFL now, and he got a multi-deal from PFL. That man lives this. He has a family in San Antonio. He drives down here on a Tuesday, stays for 3 days straight, trains 3 a days, goes back, comes back on Saturday, trains another sparring session, and he does that every single week, and he's been doing it for the last couple of years, and look what's happened to his career. He went from a 5-fight losing streak to a 7-fight winning streak. Granted, he had good coaching, he had good athleticism, he had a background, he had talent and skills already, but that effort is what's pushed him to the next level. And I think he's one of the best welterweights in the world now.
Well, Coach, I certainly appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much for being on the program, and I look forward to having you back very soon.
Thank you for having me, Tyler. Good to see you again, man.